Hi, I'm Patricia Schoolcraft, and I'm here to tell you about my journey with sarcoma, which started while I was a sophomore in college and living on a remote island off the coast of Alaska. I first noticed a heavy feeling in my pelvis with an odd digging sensation and deep stabbing almost immediately after a long bout of pneumonia. I had large olive green and purple bruises down both legs and across my abdomen, and would fall for no reason with the exception of some weakness in both legs. I complained about the pain and bruising, but there weren't any answers until this had gone on for 2 years and I started getting stress fractures throughout my pelvis. At the time, there were only 2 sarcoma specialists recommended to my parents, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. As I have family on the East Coast, I was medevaced from Anchorage to Bethesda, Maryland, with an initial diagnosis of either a giant cell tumor or osteosarcoma. I began a schedule of open biopsies with cryosurgery every 3 months for 2.5 years until a decision was made to remove a large tumor and adjacent bones from the right side of my pelvis. I was diagnosed with chondrosarcoma, and I was told that I had 6 months to live at 2 different times during that period, after it was noticed that I had a mass in my chest on CT scan. As it turns out, the mass was thought to be a remnant of my thymus gland, and I had a 6-month recovery period post-resection. Most of that was spent in a wheelchair or on crutches. 1 year after the resection on the right side, I began having the same symptoms on the left side. The left side was watched for just 3 months, and then I had a resection of that side. During both procedures, muscles were reattached, but there was nothing placed in my pelvis for support. I had a number of hospitalizations for pain control and pelvic fractures, while the pain continued and my bladder dropped into the defect left when the bones throughout my pelvis were removed. I rotated through using crutches or a walker as support for several years, but there was no evidence of disease for many years following the 2 resections. I returned to work in healthcare administration. Nearly a decade later, I started having the digging sensation and weakness in my right ankle and was on the watch and wait schedule of every 3 months all over again for follow-up. Bone spurs, a noticeable lump on the inside of my ankle, and plantar fasciitis necessitated the removal of another tumor, and a cadaver bone graft was placed. I continued working after 8 weeks with a boot in place, and things were relatively quiet with the exception of pain all day, every day. It was degrees of pain and a noticeable limp at the end of a long work day, but I was able to keep my health a secret and carry on working. In late 2009, the deep stabbing, take your breath away pain started again on the right side. I was seen in the sarcoma clinic, had multiple MRI, CT, and bone scans, which showed a large mass in April of 2010. The watch and wait clock kicked in yet again, and my complaints of pain and weakness on the right side of my pelvis continued. In late November 2012, I underwent the removal of 2 large tumors on the right side of my pelvis. A stratus inlay mesh was placed, and my bladder was suspended and in the right place for the first time in 28 years. After the reconstruction, which was modified from a planned 3D printed implant of my pelvis, I was almost completely without pain until a couple of weeks after the procedure. I made it to December 12th. I dropped the envelope from a tea bag on the kitchen floor, bent over to pick it up, and I felt a big pop. I immediately had a return of the deep, nagging pelvic pain that I had had for decades. My bladder returned to the defect, and since then I've had additional severe pain at the top of both hips, and down the side of both legs. There is significant weakness on the right side. We haven't figured out all of that yet, but I use a walker to get around again, and I stopped working at the hospital. In the last 2 years, a bony mass has appeared in my mouth, and there's a large, tender lump on my skull. I'm beginning my routine with those, and we'll see and watch what happens. When I stopped working at the hospital, I planned to return to operations management, but getting back was too difficult this time around. I still require the use of a walker, pain medication, and rest daily. The only position that is comfortable is the recumbent reclining position, but I hope one day that will change. As I left the hospital on my last day of work, I promised myself that I wouldn't just sit at home, watch bad TV, and eat chocolate while I recovered, although I've done my fair share of that. I've always been interested in design, whether it's in fashion, flowers, architecture, or interiors, and decided to take an interior design course online while I recuperated. What I realized very quickly was that design for the disabled is limited. Whether it is sensory cues to meet the needs of someone with a traumatic brain injury, a handrail to steady someone affected by a stroke, or a Rev-A-Shelf system needed for the sarcoma survivor who is missing part of their arm, there isn't a repository for products or information. Hail Haven, my design and lifestyle magazine for the disabled, the elderly, the returning veteran, or the sarcoma patient who has lost a leg, was born of that need. I chose the name after an expression my dad used on our weekly call to my grandmother when I was younger. When asked how we, my 4 sisters, and my mom were doing, my dad would respond that we were all hale and hearty. Hale means strong and healthy. Haven is a place of safety or refuge. It is my hope that the magazine will provide resources, inspiration, design ideas for those who need their homes to work for them rather against them. It's the first magazine of its kind, and with upwards of 25 million that we know about, individuals with some sort of disability in this country and baby boomers getting older, it's time. Eventually, I hope to champion a fully accessible home on a hospital campus in every state so patients can learn how to function before returning to their own homes. I partnered with Shannon Williams, who's an interior designer, architectural illustrator, and instructor, to learn architectural illustration when I discovered that a client who has a problem with her corneas could not see my computer screen. The glare on my CAD drawing was too much for her. Shannon and I sponsored the Stand Up to Sarcoma Gala last year, and we're looking forward to sponsoring it again this year. Featured in the program last year was an illustration of a completely accessible greenhouse, just a part of a fully accessible luxury kitchen that I designed and illustrated. I'm hoping to include another sneak peek of that same kitchen this year in the program. This year was my first and Boston's first race for the Cure Sarcoma. While Boston's weather didn't cooperate and soaked us all, it was inspirational, it was fun, and it was hugely successful. The attention placed on research is huge, but I'm most excited about raising the awareness of sarcoma. Although much more is known about sarcoma than when I started my journey 40 years ago, we still have work to do. Thank you.